Welcome to Electronic Voting in New Jersey Community Associations. My name is John Katz, and I'm an attorney in Hill Wallack's Community Association Practice Group, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. We are very excited to bring you this webinar in conjunction with our friends at Vote HOA Now. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping things to take care of before I introduce our speakers. First, this course is approved by CAM-ICB for 1 credit hour to fulfill continuing education requirements for the CMCA certification. In order to get full credit, you have to remain on the webinar for the full hour. Second, we will have 2 polling questions during today's webinar, one in a few minutes and another one about halfway through the presentation. Please respond to those questions when they pop up on your screen. And finally, the webinar program gives you the opportunity to type in your questions, which we will be monitoring during the program. We will have some time to get to everyone's questions at the end of the program, so we're going to try to save questions until the end. But please feel free to type in any of your questions at any time during the program. Now I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers, Ron Pearl and Kathy Slight. Ron Pearl is an attorney and the partner in charge of Hill Wallack's Community Association Practice Group. Ron concentrates his practice in the areas of community association law, construction law, eminent domain, and tax appeals. Ron has been nationally recognized for his work in the field of community association law, and he was recently awarded with the Don Buck Lifetime Contribution Award by the College of Community Association Lawyers. Kathy Slight is the Director of Sales and Marketing for Vote HOA Now. Kathy has over 15 years in community management as a community manager. She has a CMCA designation, is a CAI educated business partner, and brings an inside perspective to the oversight of sales and marketing of the Vote HOA Now program, which she is going to share with us today. Now we're going to move to our first polling question.
Here, sorry. There we go.
So we want to know who's on the call. So are you a board member, community manager, vendor professional, or other? Please submit your response. We're going to leave the poll open for a couple more seconds, and then we're going to show everybody the results. So 11% of you are board members, 84% of you are community managers, 10% are vendors or professionals, and 2% are others. So thanks for responding to our first poll. As we said, we're going to do one more after Ron's portion of the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Ron Pearl.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this webinar on electronic notice and voting. First, we need to do the legal formalities here. You will be tested on this at the end of the seminar. Only kidding. This notice basically says that this is an educational seminar, the intent of which is to provide information. It is not intended to constitute legal advice, nor is it a source of advertising or solicitation. And we thank you all for joining us. To give you an idea of what we will cover this afternoon, we will talk about the Radburn Law and its impact on electric and online voting in New Jersey, the benefits and features of online voting. Kathy will cover 6 steps to a successful vote, and we will discuss other concerns regarding online voting. Let's start with a history course, a little refresher on Radburn. Radburn is one of the oldest planned real estate developments in the United States, having been established in North Jersey in 1929. The governance structure at Radburn was somewhat undemocratic. There was no direct election of the board by homeowners. In fact, the association's documents allowed the incumbents on the board to control the election of their successors. And to make a very long story short, as the result of complaints by his constituents, State Senator Bob Gordon in Bergen County introduced the law that we now call the Radburn Act, and its intent was to ensure the rights of owners in common interest communities to vote and select their governing board. The Radburn Act is in the Planned Real Estate Development Full Disclosure Act, which is known as PREDFA or PRED to some. The law generally provides substantive and procedural requirements for the selection of association boards and for the process of amending documents in community associations. And in my opinion, one aspect of the Radburn law that has not received enough attention is its authorization of electronic notice and voting for community associations. Electronic voting and notice, in my opinion, is long overdue. Our clients have been questioning us for years on the availability of online voting, and unfortunately, we've had to tell them that there's no statutory authority. But let's go to the basics. Electronic voting is not voting by email. It is much more secure than that. It involves online voting through electronic means. The results are delivered to an association through a website or secure service or program. And Kathy will talk about her program in particular and how her company provides electronic voting from A to Z to associations. You do not have to purchase any electronic equipment. You do not have to purchase any software. This is done by a company that is set up to do this. It is secure absentee or mail ballots transmitted electronically. And for years, corporations have conducted their board votes electronically, and the technology is readily available for use by associations. So Radburn authorizes associations to use electronic voting when authorized by the governing documents. So in many cases, maybe most cases, you're going to have to amend your bylaws to authorize authorize electronic voting in the bylaws. And under Radburn, that's also easy to do because you have the rejection vote process contained in the law. It is another requirement that when the board has to make a determination to use electronic voting. And the third requirement is that an association member must consent to casting a vote electronically. This is important because for those associations who hesitate because they think that they have some members who will not be able or willing to vote electronically, that should not stop the association from making electronic voting and notices available to those who do have the inclination to use the computer, use the internet, and to vote electronically. As I said, we have many clients whose boards have been asking for quite some time when they can employ electronic voting because, quite frankly, the participation level of voting in community associations is sometimes very low, and we have a lot of managers listening into the seminar this morning, and you know what we're talking about. Electronic notice, which is different from voting. The notices, of course, are the notice of the meeting. Sometimes you will transmit the identity of the candidates and other materials in order to conduct an election. All official notices of an association can be delivered electronically when the governing documents permit electronic notices, provided that another form of notice is available. That's the same as in the voting context. If you're not inclined to use it or can't use it or don't have the equipment to get online, then another form is going to be available. Or when a member agrees in writing to accept notice by electronic means. Now, this simply means that you need to contact all of your members, and it could be done either electronically or by traditional means, and ask them if they would authorize the association to contact them with official notices electronically. Any member that agrees to accept notice by electronic means, that would enable you to give them that notice. Now, when the first part of this, when the governing documents permit electronic notices, I believe that you still need to provide the members with an opt-in or opt-out. I prefer an opt-in alternative, because then you have written proof that a member has consented to the electronic notice. And you will be surprised how many want to receive less paper and will consent to the electronic notice provision. In either event, members of the association must be given the opportunity to vote by paper ballot in the traditional way. So why is this development in the Radburn Act, why is this authorization so important? Well, because there's no other legal provision in New Jersey which would authorize electronic voting in associations. We are like many states where the nonprofit corporate statutes have not been updated to permit electronic notification or voting. Our Nonprofit Act only provides that the election of trustees may be conducted by mail and authorizes decisions in lieu of an in-person meeting if all of the members entitled to vote consent thereto in writing. There's no mention at all of the ability to employ electronic voting. So even if associations amended their bylaws, and we did a few amendments anticipating that this day would come, but even if the bylaws were amended to include electronic notice and voting, we could never be sure that the process would withstand a legal challenge. So the Radburn Act really is an important development towards the use of electronic voting in the state. As you will hear, electronic voting is actually more secure than paper ballots, proxies, and absentee ballots. Notwithstanding all the headlines about what happened in our national election in 2016, foreign governments aren't likely to be interested in interfering with community association elections, and even if they were, these companies provide levels of security that associations do not have with regard to paper and mail ballots. There is a process of verification of identity so that you're sure that the person who is voting is entitled to vote. Results are available much more quickly than in the traditional method, and voter identity is protected. You can have anonymous voting or secret ballots. You avoid the dreaded multiple envelope process. In other words, in those associations that use secret ballots. And I can tell you that a week doesn't go by where in one election or another, someone complains when an association fails to protect the privacy of the ballot. There's also confidence in the election process because it's handled by an organization other than management, other than the association. So for those associations that have individuals who have expressed a lack of confidence in having the incumbent board or management run an election, this places more confidence because it is run by an outside agency. And it will result in a cost savings for many associations. I was talking with an association last week, a client of ours, who has nearly 2,000 homes in the community. That means 1,900 and some notices and ballots and double envelopes have to go out. That's a tremendous printing expense and a tremendous mail expense, and that can be avoided by using electronic voting. So the cost, which I expect Kathy will talk about, is relatively modest in the face of all the expenses that associations face using traditional election methods. So with this, we now have the legal authorization to do it. As I said, you will need to amend your governing documents in most cases. Your association attorney should be consulted because we and other attorneys can provide the amendments and help you with the Radburn rejection vote process, which is probably the easiest way to get it done. But in the end, this is the future of voting in community associations. It may take some time for us to get there, but I will tell you that I was talking to a manager this morning who has already used the process, and I had a friendly bet with the association president. I bet that in this first go-around with electronic voting, that more than 50% of the people would still use paper ballots, and he took the position that more than 50% would use electronic, and I owe him a lunch because he was right. And so this will quickly catch on, in my opinion, and the more you do it, the easier you will see it is. The community will be happy with the ability to vote from the comfort of their homes and offices. And as I said, this is really the future of community association voting. Now I think we'll do polling question number 2.
Ron, before I switch over to the polling question, can you just explain for the webinar participants the Radburn reverse amendment procedure and how they can go about doing that, and how it's easier for them to amend their bylaws through that procedure than it would be for the regular procedure?
Sure. The rejection vote procedure, which is specifically authorized by Radburn, allows the board to adopt an amendment. So we would prepare an amendment, we would give it to the board would approve it, and then the board would send it out to the membership. These days it would have to be done by paper if you haven't amended already, to do it electronically. But we'd send a notice of the amendment, a notice that it was approved by the board, and we would give the owners 30 days within which to return a rejection ballot. And you include within the, with the amendment, a ballot. It doesn't say yes or no, it just says no. And the only people that have to return it are the individuals, the members who choose to vote against the amendment. And if in 30 days, fewer than 10% of the members reject it, it becomes final and can be recorded. If greater than 10% of the owners reject, if greater than 10% reject it, then it's defeated and it doesn't become final. But with something like this, a procedural amendment that allows ease of voting, I truly believe that few associations will fail in their effort to use this rejection ballot.
Okay, so now we're going to turn over to the next polling question. So the question is, how did you hear about today's webinar? Direct email, social media, meaning LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter, from a colleague or a friend, or other? Please submit your answer. Okay, looks like 82% of you have received a direct email from us, 3% on social media, 23% from a colleague or friend, and 1% from other. Not sure what that other could be, but let's see what it is. So without further ado, we're going to turn the program over to Kathy with Vote HOA Now.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Ron, for the great explanation. So I'm hoping I can provide some additional details about online voting today. We're going to test my ability to move the screens here really quickly. It looks like everything looks good. Some of the online voting benefits, of course, as Ron said, you are going to save time and money. As Ron said with his bet, you're going to see increased participation. In fact, online voting captures those owners who have been complacent and they have not returned paper ballots, they haven't responded to any mail communications. This will be their opportunity to quickly and efficiently assist in any association business. It could be an election, it could be an amendment, or any other thing that the owners would vote on. As explained earlier, we do provide that secure third-party management, and most of the online voting companies are that layer of separation between the manager and the board. Eco-friendly. Everything these days is emailed. You are going to be dealing with a lot less paper, and you're going to be able to remind your owners more often. Once an owner casts their ballot, the real-time results, they're tallied immediately. So at any time you can see if you're meeting that quorum requirement, which is one of the most important things that you're always looking for when you're planning those important meetings. And of course, fewer paper ballots, and you're going to achieve quorum before the meeting. Let's see if I can switch the slider. Here we go. So some of the ballot features that you're going to see, of course, are going to be a proxy, directed proxy, if you have proxy requirements. I don't think that you do in New Jersey, but you may. Most ballots will have a quorum only option. This is for the owners who don't know who the candidates are. They haven't attended any meetings. They're just not really sure, but they do want to leave their quorum so you can hold the meeting. Ballots will have the write-in candidates. They'll have the nominees, of course, those owners who want to run for the board. And then there's always the ability for someone to nominate themselves or a neighbor to nominate someone who they think would be a good representative of the community. So you're going to see those write-in spaces. Most voting companies like ours can do cumulative voting, which we don't see too often, but occasionally we do. If you have a condominium and they have percentage voting based on square footage, that type of thing, we can do the percentage voting. And then, of course, weighted voting is really important for those owners who do own multiple lots. You want to be able to combine all of their units or lots together so that they only have to cast one ballot, but it counts for all of their lots. So all of these things are options that you'll select when you're setting up your online voting site. Of course, Ron talked a little bit about the secret ballot. If you do have a secret requirement, then the vote can be set to secret. And that means not at any time anyone, even our staff here, can see how an owner voted. And so it truly is a secret ballot. And most ballots can include candidate bios, resumes, photos. We even had one client who had a short 1-minute video that each nominee had done, and we put those on the ballot as well for owners to watch. So that was really well received. And so you can be creative even with your online ballots and customize it and make it your own. So some of the additional features that are available, of course, our company, we build a custom association voting site for your community. Some voting methods are just a portal. They ask you to load your own owner information and that type of thing, and we'll get to what the services are. We generate random registration codes. It's just a little more secure if you have a sensitive election or something that you think has been challenged in the past and may be challenged again. You certainly don't want to use unit numbers or account numbers, those types of things. You'll want to have random registration codes that no one has the ability to have seen before. We also provide the voter registration authentication, and this is really important. It meets the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act for an electronic signature. And this just means that we're not capturing anyone's signature. There is a requirement for a form to be filled out. And I'm going to show you this at the end of the presentation. I have a few slides about what online voting will look like. But those forms don't capture anyone's signature. It's not a DocuSign, that type of thing. It's just a simple form, and it does constitute that electronic signature. Of course, most of the time you can load meeting documents such as your meeting minutes, 7604, the IRS ruling, those types of things. Most companies, we allow you to have unlimited email invitations and reminders. So it'll be one thing that you'll definitely want to ask, like how many reminders can we send out? Sometimes there's a limit of 3 or a limit of 6, or you may incur additional charges, so you want to look at all of those options. And then the multiple ballots is really a nice feature. If you have multiple things that you would like your members to vote on, you can have different or separate ballots. For example, you might have an election ballot and an amendment ballot. And we all know that those amendments have a higher quorum requirement. So for the multiple ballots, you would then close down the election ballot when it was finished, and you would continue to run that amendment ballot. So be sure and ask about those options. Make sure that there are additional fees to run those additional ballots. So just a little bit to consider when you're looking at your online voting providers. And then, as Ron mentioned, safety and security, of course, is number one. Even though we don't think Russia is going to hack into any HOA election or condo election, everybody wants to know that their information is safe and secure. So only owners of record can vote, and that is predetermined on a list of owners who are assigned a registration code. And the code typically can only be used once. So if an owner completed their vote, submitted their ballot, went back in to vote again, they would find that they were unable to use that code again. One of the huge benefits, of course, is no miscounted votes. You don't have to go back through the ballots and tally them again. The electronic counting and electronic reporting is accurate, and it tallies those votes as soon as they are received. No more invalidated ballots because owners are checking every box, or they're not checking any box and they're just signing, and you're not sure. You think they left their vote for quorum, but they haven't checked it, or they checked every single box and it makes their ballot invalid. Most electronic voting systems like ours will not allow you to check too many items. It will only, if there's only 2 candidates available, you'll only have 2 opportunities to select a candidate or to write in a candidate. So that is really great. And every ballot is counted towards quorum. And like I said earlier, you can only vote one time, or of course your ballot may be weighted by 2 or 3 or 4 if you owned multiple properties. And I'll talk a little bit more about the safety and security features here in just a little bit. Types of votes, they're all the same. Most of the time we see director's elections, of course, are number 1. Issues and major votes are the second, amendments, and then of course those mixed ballots. And we do a lot of the mixed ballots. We'll see the election going, like I said, an amendment vote. Maybe you're including last year's meeting minutes, the 7604, or any other items that you're asking your owners to vote on. So they're typically all the same. So everybody wants to know, how do we have a successful vote? So step number 1, follow your state statutes, consult with your legal representation. Ron probably can answer this question. How long does the association need to keep ballots? We see it vary from state to state. Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 6 months. I don't know if Ron wants to provide the information here, or maybe everyone's documents are different. Does an owner need to opt in to receive an online ballot? We talked a little bit about this in the beginning, and it looks like they do have to opt in to receive their notices online and to vote online. And most online voting providers and us too can do that opt-in for you electronically. If you're going to do that, we certainly suggest that you start about 60 to 90 days before your actual vote, so you can try and get to all those owners, asking them to opt in, and we continue to invite them to opt in to receive the notices online and vote online. And then, of course, the most important thing, does the system provide a receipt to the voter? Well, our system will provide a receipt of exactly how they voted on each issue on the ballot. This is especially important if you're having a secret vote, because if an owner wanted to come in and confirm that their vote had been recorded, or if they had a question, they would definitely need to produce their receipt so you could see exactly how they voted and make those necessary adjustments if you were allowing them to change their vote or those types of things. So keep those in mind when you're setting up your voting parameters. Do they receive a receipt of exactly how they voted, which is very, very important. Step number 2, follow your documents. Typically it's in your bylaws, how you should run your election or an amendment vote. How far in advance do you need to send the meeting notice? Most of the time it's 10 to 50 days. Some we see up to 60 days. Is 60 days too far out? Do we need to tighten that up a little bit? Try and make yourself a timeline or a plan, and typically we can help you with a timeline of that type of thing. What's the quorum requirement? Is it 20%? Is it 25%? For an amendment, is it 65, 75? Sometimes we even see 100% requirement for those quorums. So make sure that you know what your quorum requirement is. Is the ballot secret? We talked a little bit about that. You'll find that in your bylaws as well. Do you need to allow for write-ins? Some documents say that there are no write-ins. All candidates must have their submission forms or their nomination forms in by a certain date, and there aren't any write-ins, which means that typically you wouldn't have any nominees from the floor either. So be sure that you know what your parameters are, and does the ballot require a proxy? So determine if you have a directed proxy or a proxy. I don't see too many proxies used because most people will just vote online with the online ballot, but be sure that you know what you are supposed to be offering your membership. Step number 3, plan in keeping with the timeline and how long you should allow the owners to vote. Typically, we're seeing 2 weeks or longer for an election, but it typically does take multiple requests for an owner to respond to a voting invite. But it's funny, we have there's kind of a formula. In the very beginning, most people will vote. They'll vote right away, and so we'll see a huge surge in voting. Then maybe during the middle, it will go down a little bit. And then once we change the messages saying you've only got a week left to vote in this election, or just a few days, we'll definitely see voting increase there in that last week. So real important, getting back to how many reminders can you send and when can you send those. Make sure that you have the ability to send those reminders at the end too. They're just as important. Of course, plan the time needed for an amendment. So like I said, those are the higher quorum requirements, participation levels, and you want to make sure we're seeing some of those ballots run for 30, 60 to 90 days before they're actually able to achieve the required percentage to pass those, or at least to have a valid vote. Unfortunately, a few of them don't pass, so be prepared for that too, but most of them do. And of course, if the quorum requirement is high, it will take longer to reach your quorum requirement. So step 4, update your information. And this is something that you can have plenty of time to plan for. Make sure your owner contacts, especially the email addresses, are updated before the vote. A good thing to do is ask them for a primary voting email. Most online voting systems will only allow one email per lot. So you'll have to identify who is going to receive that invitation to vote. You may want to send a test message out if you have a grouping of emails, and make sure that you're contacting those people that you get bounce backs from. And everyone, even anyone in the accounting department, all the way to customer service or the manager or the admins, can be asking for a current email. So maybe just make it a part of how you do business, making sure that you've got those current emails. Of course, you can get into advertising here. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but update your information as soon as you can. Share as you normally would. If you've got a big important vote coming up, or an election, or something that you need them to participate in, we see a lot of meet the candidates nights, town hall meetings, meeting notices. These types of things can also go on invoices if they have a little area where you can put a message in, those types of things. Of course, other places could be the website, social media, newsletters, billing statement, like I said, bulletin boards. We're even seeing the electronic bulletin boards in the elevators. So you have tons of opportunities to advertise the vote and for owners to provide their primary voting email address. And then, of course, another great place is the association office or clubhouse. If you have one of those facilities, you know that owners are walking in and out of there every single day. Most of the time, the same owners all the time, but they still are a good resource for you. You can talk to them and they can mention to other owners that they should provide their email address to the office because we're getting ready to, start an online vote. So those are all great ways to communicate. And then, of course, privacy policies. Everybody is always afraid, what are they going to do with my email? How long are they going to store it? Who else is going to see it? Those types of things. The biggest, most important thing, of course, is to check the online voting company's policies. They should be very clear about how they handle the owner information. Make sure that they've got that data protection and, of course, the SSL encryption. And that's kind of a really technical term, but it just simply means that the vote cannot be altered in transit. So SSL encryption, the vote cannot be altered in transit so that no one can see exactly how an owner had voted. Of course, you want to make sure they don't share their emails with anyone, that they don't sell or use them for any other items. It could be that you are working with an online voting company whose primary business is really printing, and they have several clients that they like to send out information about printing. You just want to work with them for online voting. You don't want them to use it for any other businesses that they may have for that company. Of course, we exclusively work in the HOA industry and only serve the HOA clients and condominium and co-op clients, but a lot of companies are doing online voting as an additional company. So you'll want to make sure that you ask those questions right up front and right in line with what other services do they provide, as far as the printing or any other services that they've done in the past. And they've added on online voting because there definitely is a need for that. And we're seeing that in all of the states. And then most importantly, ask for references of their clients and call them and talk to them about what worked in their community, what didn't work, what they would have done differently. Online voting is still very new, and it's good to talk to other people who have had success stories about how their election went online. People to involve or not involve. You could look at it both ways. Most of the time you'll have a voting committee, you could have board of directors and trustees. The great thing about having the full service setup and management of all of your votes or surveys is that most of the time the voting committee and the board of directors, your manager, everyone is not involved in that process. And the voting company will handle receiving all those ballots and those types of things. So they only receive a report on how they are as far as quorum. And we have so much fun sending our clients the first week an email that says that they've already met quorum and they can certainly plan on having the meeting. Once voting is over, it typically only takes about an hour to put together the final report and send it over. So don't be afraid to let your election run. We have some clients who say, oh, we should shut it off 5 days ahead of time, or a whole 2 days ahead of time, but you really seriously can let your online vote run up until the time that you would have said that all paper ballots must be received by a certain time and date. You can let your online voting election run up until that time too. Involve your attorney, of course, if you have the amendment, such as Ron had talked about earlier, or some people, some associations will have us send the final report to the attorney. They just really don't even want to receive it. And we certainly have a single point of contact that we ask that information where it should be sent to. Sometimes it's an accountant. Sometimes it's an office staff or a community member. And so all of those people should be identified in the very beginning as the single points of contact that can ask questions about the election. Of course, we never give any election information as far as who is winning or what the results are. Those are all held for the final report. And that's how most of the online voting companies should do it. So just an example here, and I've got a few examples of what an invitation to vote might look like. This is just a really simplified version. It typically will have the title of the election or the amendment. Our messages are dynamic. They'll be addressed to an individual or two individuals or a corporation or a trust, whoever is provided on the Excel spreadsheet. Of course, it tells them their community needs their participation to elect 4 board members in this case and 1 important amendment. So this is where the information could go about what the election and the vote is about. Of course, we always like to say voting online makes it quick and easy. We can even include messages in here, you know, like it's saving the corporation, you know, $1,000 by not sending out paper, or we'll be doing a comparison, or fun things like that, that can really draw your community in and ask them to participate. But most of the time, these messages are very simple. It's just please click here to go to the voting site, and then this is of course what a random registration code would look like, and then the thank you can be from the manager or the association. So very, very simple. They're actually a lot prettier in real life. They have photos of your monument or your community clubhouse or something that your owners are familiar with seeing. This is just really a very generic message here, but still gets the message across that we're having an online vote. Second, this is that registration page that I talked about that constitutes your electronic signature. And this meets that federal requirement for the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act. And it just outlines what is required to constitute an electronic signature. So if you've got a signature requirement for a vote that is needed on a ballot, most of the time we're seeing our communities have the owners register once a year. So they register and create an account, they set a password. Of course, when all of this is done, they receive a receipt, of course, that they've created an account. And then any other votes during the year typically can be done by an encrypted link, which is very, very easy. Before the message before here, whoops, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. Whoops, I don't know how to go back, hold on. There we go. Sorry about that. Here, instead of having the registration code, they would just have a link. If they had already registered and it was the second or the third vote in a year, they wouldn't have to use the code again or anything. They would just move right through. They had already been verified that they were an owner and created an account. But once a year, we do recommend that they do the electronic signature and register. So most of the time, ballot options. You can see right up at the top, this is a board of directors election. In this case, their voting weight is 1, but this is where they would know, and can also be included on that invitation message, where their weight could be 2 or 3 or 4. If it was a condominium and they had percentage, their whole entire percentage would be displayed there. So it'll be something that they're familiar with seeing. I'm sure if they have percentage, they've added them up before and they know exactly what they should be looking for. Any instructions, of course, can go on the ballot. Typically, it's the date and time, the quorum needed, maybe the location of the meeting. Anything else that you're required to put on a notice is going to go on the ballot here as well. And most ballots have the opportunity to have the text be completely customizable. Of course, then we have our candidates. You know, Amy always, you know, it's always about her, and Barry Best, he's always talking about how good he is, and Charles, choose me. You know, he always wants everyone to choose him. So Those are your selections, and typically there'll be write-ins. I didn't include a full entire ballot, but like I said earlier, our ballots do have the opportunity to have photos and bios and those types of things. But here, basically, you're going to vote for up to 3 candidates, or you're going to vote to make quorum only, not voting on your candidates. Of course, you've got the attachment, which is very important if you have long resumes, which we've had some candidates that have 5 or 10-page resumes. Amendments, this is great. There is no limit to the size of a PDF that can be loaded here. So if you have an entire amendment document that you would like the membership to see, or you're required to send them, it can be loaded here. Another really great thing about voting online and is that you really don't have to know what kind of browser you're using or how you're going to open the document. Typically, when you click on a document, it will just open up in whatever browser is your main browser that you go to all the time. The system figures that out in the background. So for those people who are afraid, they don't know if their browser can handle it, or they can't load large documents, all of that is typically taken care of with the online voting. So they will have the ability to look at everything just like everybody else, even if they don't know anything about their phone, their tablet, or their computer, which they, of course, can vote from any device. At the end, of course, they should receive a confirmation email. All the way through here, we provide different messages like, are you sure that you want to move forward? You haven't used all your selections, those types of things. So they kind of get prompted all the way through an online voting system. But at the end here, they can see that they've completed steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. Their vote had been recorded. If they had voted on candidates, it would be in the candidate area. If they voted yes or no on the meeting minutes, that would be provided. I probably could have gotten a better example of this. But a receipt, of course, has been sent to their email address, and that will show exactly their email address, and they should receive a receipt as soon as their vote is completed. So make sure that your owners, if you do have that requirement to receive the receipt, which a lot of states do, that they're able to send that confirmation email. Okay, so worried about an older group. This is probably the most common question that we get asked, or the most common comment that we hear, of course, is that people are worried about their senior set, but they have more time than we do. And this is as of May of 2017. 67% of American adults ages 65 and older go online, and 65 to 69, it's actually 82%, and that was 2 years ago. Our seniors are becoming more active, and they are embracing the internet and technology at a higher rate than any of us can even think about. For most seniors, it's a daily fixture in their lives. They're communicating with their grandkids, their kids, their friends, they're traveling. 70% use the internet on a typical day. And it could be that they go to the library, they have a computer club, or something in their community that they're going on the internet. And even with seniors 80 and up, I love all these stats, 44% at that time were reporting using the internet. So don't underestimate the older group. They are just as technology savvy as we are, or as we think we are anyway. And then, of course, keep it simple, and keep the invite email simple. Many owners are going to receive it on their tablet or their phone. If it gets too large, they're just going to delete it. They're not going to take the time to read it. Don't clutter it with photos. Don't use caps. Use a hyperlink when you can back to a document, kind of exactly how I showed in the invitation message and the attachment. Keep the ballot clear and concise. Don't flood it with a bunch of information. Save all of that for the attachment. You have some owners who don't want to read that information, and some owners, of course, that will read all of it. And don't let technology intimidate you. We offer a webinar twice a month, and we go through exactly what an online vote should look like, what the owner experience is. So if you are, most of the time you're afraid to do it because you haven't seen it, look for those companies that will do demos or do educational events and that type of thing, and go join one. They're free. You can look at them anytime. And of course, many companies and us too offer the full service setup and management. So even if you're intimidated by technology or you can't imagine what it looks like, leave it to the experts. It's what we do all day long. We run votes, we talk to people about voting, and we explain how the voting system works. So ask those questions, join those webinars, learn a little bit more about it, because as Ron said earlier, it is where we're going in the future. Everyone's going to be voting online. So well, just one more thing. Everybody always says, how much does it cost? You know, how can my association afford it? Do I have to budget for it? You'd be surprised. It's typically fairly reasonable. You'll have to, of course, ask your provider if they, we just do online voting. We don't mail any paper. We don't do anything. Our most successful clients are doing 100% online and making paper available upon request. So those owners who want a paper ballot or enjoy coming to the meeting are still enjoying those benefits, but most of the owners are voting online. So for example, we bundle everything together for the first vote in a year is what we call it, and it includes our custom site, the annual software license, and the management, full service setup and management of one vote or survey. So let's say that you had 101 to 200 units in your community. The cost for online voting for you with the full service setup and management and everything would only be $618. So, and you can calculate that out and the participation and the cost savings. So 101 to 200, $618, and that is an annual contract. And then of course, 201 to 300 homes is $670. And then for some of you that have the larger associations, let's say 501 to 625 units, you're only spending $868. So those fees are very, very reasonable, and you know you're going to meet quorum before you get to the meeting. And if you have any questions, most of your online voting providers will answer those questions about what's included in the online voting package. So hopefully the pricing and the information on the ballots was helpful.
Kathy, and that what you anticipated, one of the questions that we got. Another question is, can the opt-in process be done electronically with a vote? The opt-in process can be done electronically. It can, and I would recommend it because with the electronic opt-in process, you have multiple notices at no additional cost, essentially, because the electronic notification is so easy, and the response is instantaneously by by a click. And so I highly recommend that you do the opt-in process electronically. Keep in mind that there are a variety of notices required under Radburn now. First is the call for candidates, the notification that every member in good standing has the right to nominate themselves or someone else. That can, if accepted by the members, that can be done electronically and is very efficient. The timing of notices is controlled by your bylaws, but Radburn does have a provision that it has to be between 14 and 60 days. That is the notice of the election meeting. I also wanted to answer a couple of other things that Kathy raised along the way. How long to keep the ballots? Well, I haven't seen very many association bylaws that contain a time frame for keeping the ballots. I like to recommend 6 months to 12 months. I suggest that you put it in your voting procedure so everyone has notice how long those ballots will be kept. And obviously, when they're done electronically, there's no burden on the association for doing the electronic keeping the electronic ballots. Where do provisions on voting usually go? They are usually in your bylaws. Remember, the declaration or the master deed establishes the legal relationships between the association and its members and the association, who owns what, who has to take care of what. The bylaws are the operational details, and so you'll find most of the provisions on virtually universally in the bylaws on voting, nomination, qualification for office, and all of that. And so that's why Radburn allows you to do this rejection vote process only for the bylaws, and so that's convenient for this purpose. Secret, we mentioned the ballots. Oh, we mentioned write-ins. Kathy mentioned write-ins a number of times. Many associations don't like write-in options. If your bylaws do not require that you do nominations from the floor or opt-ins, you don't have to. And fewer documents I'm seeing require either one. So write-ins are optional. They're available electronically as well, but that doesn't mean that you have to do them. One note about Radburn and proxies, most associations do have proxy provisions. The Nonprofit Act says if your bylaws have proxy provisions, then the owners are entitled to vote by proxy. And Radburn adds to that if you send out proxies, you also have to send out absentee ballots. And so what we've been doing for our clients is combining the two in a proxy absentee ballot form that they're so close that we can combine the two purposes usually, unless your bylaws have something to the contrary. The limitations on the size of the documents that Kathy was talking about. Just because there are no limits with these companies sending them out for you, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't impose your own limits. Like when I heard a 10-page biography, I know that I would guess 100% of you managers attending this webinar cringed when you heard that. Yes, you are still entitled to impose limitations far less than 10 to 15 pages. One question, Kathy, how long does your company keep the results? I talked about a recommended time for keeping the results. And by the way, it can be shorter than 6 months if your documents don't require it. But Kathy, what typically, are you prepared to keep them for longer than a year?
We do. As long as the association is a client of ours, we will keep their final results as long as they are a client. But we typically will delete and archive the elections after a certain amount of time. And it's one of the questions that we ask, you know, how long do you want us to keep that information in our system? Sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's 3 months or 6 months. So we can certainly meet any of those requirements. But the final reports with all of the voting information are kept as long as they are a client of ours.
Okay, a couple more questions. Hopefully we have a couple of minutes left. Very good question. Is the electronic vote a proxy vote or an absentee ballot? No, it's a vote. It's just the same as an in-person vote, although it's done electronically. It's an electronic vote, but it's a direct vote by an owner. So while you can do the absentee ballot or proxy, you can distribute it by electronic means, and some people may receive it electronically and decide to send it in an envelope. This vote is the vote. The electronic vote is a vote directly by the person. And under the law now, you can count those votes just like any other votes.
And to add to that, all electronic ballots do count towards quorum as well.
Here's another very good question. With Radburn requiring the candidates to be listed on the ballot, and by the way, in alphabetical order, how can you have write-ins? Well, if the documents provide for write-ins, you have to allow them. But the fact of the matter is, and the question really suggests the answer, it's really a tremendous disadvantage. Nobody's going to get enough write-in votes to win when you have to publish names of all the candidates in advance. Most of my clients don't do write-in ballots. I think that they're pretty much a waste of time.
Well, and on our end, we never have seen Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse or Donald Trump or anyone else who gets a write-in most often, which those are the most often, show up at a meeting and accept the nomination.
Kathy, the one last question, and you have like 15 seconds. Does your company provide a letter that can be used to explain the process to owners?
We do, yes. In fact, our estimates come with a full board-facing presentation that you could show at a meeting, and several other documents that provide additional information about online voting that we're happy to share, and it's on our website as well.
Okay, so we're out of time now. I just want to thank Ron and Kathy for their presentation today, and I hope you enjoyed our webinar. I do want to remind you, and Kathy mentioned this earlier before, if you are interested in Voto 829 Now's product, you can go and sign up for one of their webinars. Kathy, you do them twice a month, is that right?
We do, twice a month on the first and the third Thursday, and our schedules are posted on the website if you're looking for it.
So I will say that I participated in one a couple weeks ago, and it really gives you a good flavor for how the voting system works. So I encourage anybody who's interested to sign up for one of those. For those of you who need credit, we will be emailing you a certificate of attendance within the next few weeks. If you do not receive a certificate, or if you have any other questions, you can send an email to info, that's INFO, @hillwallach.com. And if you have any additional questions about the presentation or how you can legally implement electronic voting for your association, you can reach out either to Ron or to Kathy, and their information is on the screen right now. So again, thanks for participating, and we hope to talk to you again soon.